Hello and welcome to Todd Talk, where insight meets inspiration. I'm your host, Todd Hiller, and I'm an author, speaker, and longtime community leader, here to guide you on a journey towards fulfillment and balance. In every episode, we'll explore ways to fill life's emptiness, helping you uncover practical tools to create harmony, purpose, and happiness. Whether it's thriving in your career, nurturing personal growth, or simply finding joy in the everyday, Todd Talk is your space for real conversations and actionable advice. So let's thrive together, personally, professionally, and beyond. This is Todd Talk, and I'm thrilled to have you here.
Hello, my friends, and thank you as always for being here, and welcome to Todd Talk. First things first, I want to check in with you. How's your week going? How was your week last week? If you're listening on Sunday when the episode drops, how was your weekend? I want to know, and if you want to comment how it was going, you certainly can, but just do that for yourself. Give yourself that personal check-in, because I think sometimes we as people forget to check in with ourselves. You know, we have a lot of conversations that end up at the surface level of, oh, hey, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? I'm good, great, busy. How are the kids? They're good, etc., etc., etc. But if you are asking yourself truly, or you're asking a very good friend of yours, ask them if their heart is happy. Ask them if they feel content. Ask them if when they woke up in the morning they were happy to be awake, or if they wanted to go right back to bed. So I want to check in with you. I want to know how you guys are. Comment anywhere on social media you can about how you're feeling, or on this podcast episode, and let me know, because I always want to know how my listeners and my viewers are doing. And that question is going to relate a lot to what we talk about today. So today we're going to talk about the difference between limits and boundaries, and more specifically, why that difference matters. I think we as people, a lot of times, we don't confuse limits and boundaries, but maybe we blur the line between them, and we sort of forget which is which, and we kind of forget maybe that they do relate to each other, and obviously relate to our personal wellness and our feeling of being okay and happy in this world as we deal with whatever's on our plate. But they are two very different things, and they have very specific qualities about them that you can kind of use to navigate which ones they are, and maybe which ones you need to implement in your life, or which ones you need to check in about. And I would encourage you to stay and hang out, because if you've ever felt like you were running on empty, or if you're saying yes too much, or you're blaming yourself, or being quote-unquote too sensitive, or not quote-unquote not strong enough, this episode is definitely for you. So stick around and hang out. As always, you know this is a kind place. This is a non-judgmental place. It's a place to be happy and just hang out and have a good time while we listen. So let's start out by defining limits. So what are limits? I think limits are the maximum amount of physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual energy that you can give in any given moment, any given day, or any given season. And those things will vary. They're not always measured the exact same way. Sometimes we measure our energy and our limits within a day, or sometimes within a season, or a season of our life, or a season of work, or a sports season. There's lots of different ways to measure it, but that's what we're looking at. You know, they are shaped by our personality, our health, our stress, our trauma, and our life stage. There's lots of different things that coincide to set up the limits that we have as people. And look, this is not a sign of weakness. Please do not think that about yourself. I, for a long time, fell into the trap of thinking that if I was not doing everything all the time, you know, that I was being lazy, or sitting down and resting was lazy. I didn't know that rest was not a reward. It took me a long time to learn that. So trust me, I've been there. If you're someone who says, oh man, I always have to go, I can't have limits because I have to keep pushing and I have to keep going, you're going to end up in a real bad way if you keep doing that. Now, there are great things that can come from pushing your limits, and that can come from stepping outside your comfort zone and working to push yourself and become better and working hard to achieve your goals. That's something completely different. But when it comes to limits and yourself and your body and your mental and physical and emotional and spiritual and physiological well-being, there's only so much that we can give before we end up in a really bad way. Now, a really simple one to look at is if you have a broken leg and you are only 2 weeks into the healing process, running a marathon is probably not for you, right? That is beyond our limits of what we can do with the broken leg. Has someone done it? Probably in the course of history, maybe. Could you say, oh, I'll sit in a wheelchair and someone can run and push me? Sure, that's a workaround. But the black and white of it is, if you have a broken leg, the limit is you probably can't run the Boston Marathon tomorrow if you're only a week into your healing process. And again, that doesn't make you a weak person. It just means that circumstantially, and given that point in your life, your health or your well-being and your physical condition means that you have a limit because your leg is broken. If anybody is listening from my firefighter or first responder community, all my friends and colleagues in the world of fire department, EMS, and police and first responder stuff, just because you work a 24 and your shift is 24 doesn't mean you should be doing 24s without any recovery time. And unfortunately, I think this happens a lot. I have friends who, we live now in the world of forced overtime and forced holds, and nobody gets to go home for 6 days in a row because one person called in sick. And unfortunately, it's just become the nature of the beast. So yes, can we work multiple 24s in a row? Anybody listening who is in the fire service or is a family member will know, yep, sometimes we have to. We're not allowed to understand that limit. But that doesn't mean you should be doing it without any recovery time in between. It doesn't mean you should just work 24s on and on and on and on and say, well, I can do this in perpetuity. Nothing's ever going to go wrong, because believe me, something will go wrong eventually. You'll either be too tired or too worn out or too burned out. And unfortunately, we could do a whole nother episode about that culture in the world of firefighting. But, that's something that is a limit you should, remind yourself exists. And if you work in a hospital, same thing. I know there's force holds, police, fire, EMS. You guys are hospital workers. You guys are all in this long battle and this long fight. So we're not going to go too far down this road of a tangent. But please know that, I understand that so well, and I feel for you, because I know it's something sometimes you can't get around. But no matter which way you look at it, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual, whatever it is, the language cue of I've reached my limit means I have no more capacity right now. And you guys have heard me say before that burnout is about capacity. It's not just about energy. So when you reach your limit, that's what you're saying. You say, listen, I have no more capacity to do this one thing right now. Could be energy-wise, could be emotionally, could be physically, could be health-wise, stress-wise, trauma-wise, spiritual energy, emotional energy, anything on that whole gauntlet and that whole circle of things that we have to give away when it comes to ourself and our energy. Sometimes we say, I've reached my limit, I've got no more to give. And please, again, hear me. This doesn't mean that's a failure. This is not an, oh gosh, I've reached my limit, I can't give you anymore. That's so silly to think that. Like, we are only people. We are flesh and blood, and yes, some people have tons of energy and can go and accomplish lots of things. Trust me, I've been there, I've lived it, I've done it. I've pushed through lots of different things. I've said yes to everything anybody asked me to do, and I ended up in a bad spot of burned out and worn out. But it doesn't mean you're a failure when you say, hey, I can't give anymore right now. I've reached my limit. That's just silly to think that. So whatever you do, don't feel badly ever if you say to someone, or you have to say to someone, hey, I've reached my limit. Don't have capacity for that right now. I need to reset, and I'll check back in with you soon. That is perfectly okay, and probably very necessary in a lot of instances. All right, so those are limits. I've reached my limit. So now what is a boundary, right? So boundaries are more of protective tools. The limits kind of happen in the moment. As things are happening, you say, hey, I've reached my limit. I've been doing this thing or giving my energy away to this person or this commitment, and I've been helping them or helping this organization with X, Y, and Z, but I've reached my limit. I'm out of capacity. I have no more to give. A boundary is kind of like the protective tool that you set up ahead of time. That's that proactive approach to making sure you honor your limits. So at the beginning of the episode, I said these two things go hand in hand, and that's what I mean. They definitely do. So you put boundaries in place to make sure you honor your limits, and you don't end up in a place where you just have to throw your hands up in the air and say, I can't do this anymore. You've pushed me past my limit. I'm out. Leave me alone. Because while that might be great in the movies and it might look good on screen in this massive blowout of a cinema scene, it's not all that good when it happens in real life. Trust me, I know. I've lived it firsthand. Been there with the hands in the air and the yelling and the can't do this and the frustration all wrapped up into one. It's really not pretty when it all unfolds in half a second. So what are boundaries, right? So boundaries they're guidelines you create to protect your energy, your values, your time, and your well-being. And you put them in place, and they can change. You don't have to say, well, I'll put boundaries in place today, and they have to stay that way for 50 years. We've talked about in another episode that was specifically about setting boundaries. Boundaries can change when you get older, when your kids get older, when you have less on your plate, when your job changes, when your job role changes, when you're no longer a caregiver for your kids or for an elderly parent. All that stuff changes. Our boundaries can change too, because our energy and our capacity for stuff will also change, and that's okay. So don't get too wrapped up in the fact that, oh my God, if I set these now, they can never change. This is not a one and done, set it and forget it, meal forever, right? They can change as we go. The other thing it's important to note is that boundaries are often expressed outwardly to other people, unlike limits, which are very much an internal thing. You as a person know where your limit is. You know how you feel. You know how much energy you have left. You know how much capacity you have left. You know what your heart is telling you to do in the moment when it comes to any given commitment or obligation. You know that internally. You say, hey, I'm good. I haven't reached my limit yet. I can keep going. I can keep approaching. Like when you're running a race, okay? Forget the broken leg. If you're someone who sets out to run a race or just even go for a run, you know that if you can keep running and you feel like your lungs aren't going to collapse and you can keep going and keep pushing, you have not reached your limit of physical energy to expend for your run. You can keep going. You're not at your limit. A boundary is sometimes something we express outwardly to other people to protect those limits, right? So it's saying no to taking on a brand new project at work or at home or within your community when you already feel like you're swamped and you say, hey, I have too much on my plate already, okay? A boundary is saying I will not answer emails after 5 p.m. or after 7 p.m. And so many of us, especially in the work from home culture now, so many of us do that, right? Our computer or our watch or our phone dings at 9:30 p.m. and we're still up watching Netflix or reading a book or having a bowl of ice cream. We'll think, we'll just go check it quick and respond. But doing that over and over again means you have no boundaries with work, and then that becomes very blurry. Your personal life and work just blend together, and eventually, sometimes, unfortunately, the people you work for think that you are now accessible 24/7, and that blurs, and that boundary just goes away altogether. Okay, so that boundary is something you put in place to protect your energy, to protect your limits, to protect yourself and your well-being. Okay, and a boundary can also be personal with a relationship. It's not just with a work project or a commitment or an obligation. You can tell someone, listen, I really don't appreciate when you speak to me in that tone or when you speak to me about these things because I really don't have interest in them anymore. And I had to do this kind of recently. I had some folks who kept talking about some stuff, and I'm like, look, that part of me is over and in the past, and I get that you're still kind of living and breathing and walking through it, but I don't need you, like I don't want you to keep bringing it up to me because I'm so much more at peace without that in my life, without that constant negativity and toxicity kind of rolling around. So it can be a boundary that you set. You can set a boundary with your best friend. It doesn't mean you're not best friends with them anymore. It doesn't mean that you don't like them or they can't talk to you about anything in the world. It just means, hey, listen, when it comes to X, Y, and Z, here's where I need you to stop. Here's the boundary line. Please don't cross it. Can you bring this stuff up and ask me for some feedback? Sure. But I don't want it every single day, or I don't want it every single conversation, or I don't want that to be the only thing we ever talk about, right? That could be part of the boundary. The boundary doesn't have to be black and white, cut and dry, yes, no, split right down the middle. You can have it set up so it works well for you in the capacity that you need it to in any given situation or circumstance. Okay, so we said there was a language cue for limits. There's kind of also one for boundaries. I have a boundary about X, Y, and Z, and that means I'm choosing to protect myself in this way proactively before something goes wrong or before something pushes me past my limit and I kind of get upset and explode and blow up because I feel like I'm, a ticking time bomb and I have nothing left to give to anybody. And also, please remember, boundaries are not walls. I want you to think of a boundary as a bridge to a healthier relationship, because I brought this up about, making a boundary with your best friend. It's okay to do that. I had to make boundaries with people in my life who I'm still friends with, who I still talk to, but I had to say, hey, listen, this stuff that we're talking about right now, like this is something I don't even want to talk about it anymore because I can't stand it. I'm so much happier when it's not part of my life. And they understood, and that's an okay thing to do. It doesn't mean you don't want to be friends with the person anymore. It doesn't mean you're putting a wall up between you and you're saying, we can't talk about anything anymore ever. That's certainly not the case. It's just saying, hey, listen, I know our friendship, relationship, marriage, best friendship, whatever it is, coworkers, I know that our relationship will be much better off if we set this boundary and use it to guide us to a healthier and better relationship or friendship or whatever it is, right? So it's not a wall, it's a bridge to better places. And if you think about this, we can almost kind of set this up. My brain now is working. I'm a very visual person. You guys know that. My brain is like making this little, spreadsheet in my mind, this little table about the differences between limits and boundaries and like their similarities and differences. And if I can, I'll try to get it maybe as in the description of the podcast, or maybe as a little a link somewhere. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but so if you think about this, like the feature of each thing, of each limit or each boundary, like they're both are a little bit different, right? So if you say, when it comes to maybe the feature is internal versus external, a limit is something that's internal. It's something you feel and understand it in your heart. If I try to run 4 more steps, I'm going to pass out because I've been running for 15 miles. It's 95 degrees outside and I'm going to die. Okay. That's something you feel internally. I cannot run anymore. I cannot push myself anymore. That internally, if someone calls you with one more question about work when you're trying to sit down and have dinner with your family at 6:30 at night, you're going to explode and throw your cell phone out the window. That's something you can feel. That stress, that frustration, it wells up in your heart and in your chest. That is definitely something you can feel. A boundary is something that's external because it's expressed, right? You tell people what your boundaries are, or you set them up so people understand what your boundaries are. Boundaries aren't necessarily something you feel, and hopefully that makes sense. Yes, they relate to your feelings, but a boundary is something you put in place to protect your limits or to protect the way you feel going forward, given lots of different situations. And you can make boundaries surrounding lots of different areas of your life, obviously. Right? And if we keep going down like the feature column, right, if you think about it being reactive and proactive, limits are often reactive because when you exceed a limit and when you get pushed too far, or when you say, I have no more to give, but you keep asking, when you have that blow up moment, right, that knee-jerk reaction, they are a reactive process. When your limit gets exceeded, you say, no way, I can't do this anymore. Enough is enough. Just stop. And you kind of have this explosion moment, and some people react a lot more than others, but it's still something you feel, and it's a reactive energy that says, hey, you pushed me way past my limit. I can't do this. I need to take a step back and rest, or take a step back and reset, or take a break, or stop talking about this, or whatever it is. Boundaries are proactive. They are intentional choices that you make to make sure you don't get pushed past your limit and you don't reach that breaking point where you have to have that explosive, reaction and say, that's it, I've been pushed too far. So the boundary is proactive, and the limit getting pushed past specifically is reactive. So hopefully that makes sense too. And if we keep going down this, I really wish I'm going to have to type this out because my brain is in overdrive right now. And we talked about boundaries being changeable, right? So limits are also changeable, but I think the duration kind of matters, and the duration is a little bit different, right? So often your limits change day to day. If you wake up fired up on a Monday morning, ready to hit the ground running and take on your entire week, that's awesome. You have lots of energy and capacity to do stuff. If it's Thursday afternoon at 4:30 and you have had one heck of a week and everything has gone wrong and everyone has asked too much of you, obviously your limits that day are going to be different than they were Monday morning when you had a great weekend, got lots of sleep, and you showed up Monday morning and hit the ground running, ready to go. That's not a bad thing. It just means that they are going to be very fluid and change very often day to day. Sometimes limits can even change maybe hour to hour. If you do that, if we use the run analogy, if you go out for a run first thing in the morning and you hit the ground running, that's great. And you tire yourself out. You say, I'm at my limit. I can't go any further. Well, if you go home and rest and stretch and, you have a good breakfast or a good lunch and then you kind of go back out in the afternoon, you say, I can do this again. Your limit has changed. You're not at the limit of saying I can't run any further anymore. You're like, hey, let's do this. Let's run a little more. Let's get the goal going. And that's a very physical example, but it's like this emotionally with your energy as well. Same kind of idea. Boundaries, on the other hand, like I said before, they can change, but usually they are more consistent or strategic in how you set them up. They don't typically change day to day. Your boundaries are going to be a little bit more long-term. Can they change when your life stages change? Yes, absolutely. I said before, when you're not taking care of your kids anymore and your kids aren't super small and super little and they need you less, you have more time and energy for other things, your other friends, your other people in your life, other commitments, whatever. Same thing with if you are, you're working full time. All of a sudden one day if you retire or you switch to part-time or you get to work from home 2 or 3 days a week, obviously things can change and you can kind of shift your boundaries a little bit based on what you have time and energy and capacity for. But they don't typically change day to day. If I set the boundary, hey, I don't want to talk about this one thing with my 2 good friends because it makes me upset and frustrated and I'm happy that I've walked away from that part of my life. If I change that back and forth every day, obviously I'm not going to do myself any favors. I'm going to end up wishy-washy and it's just going to get reintroduced back into my life. And eventually, pretty soon, the boundary's not going to exist, right? So they're more strategic and they're more consistent, even though they can change kind of long-term. So limits kind of change day to day. Boundaries can change, they can change after a while, but usually they're more strategic and more consistent. And the purpose of these things, the purpose of limits is to measure your capacity. That is your body's way of saying, hey, listen, friend, you only have a certain amount that you can do. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, physiologically, there is only a certain amount of energy you have and only a certain amount you can do. Now, can that be really huge? Yes, absolutely. I know people who have lots of energy to give to other people, and I am someone who loves to give to other people. And I have found that by keeping my cup full, by feeling well rested and spending time doing the things I enjoy doing, that leaves my cup full, and when it starts to overflow, I can give the overflow to other people, and that's great. So please don't think that if I'm saying, oh yeah, everybody has limits, that I'm saying, oh, you can't do a lot. There are people in this world who do tremendous things for people, but they still have limits. Hey, even the best runner in the world still has limits. The best swimmer, the best diver, the best cyclist, the best whatever you want to say, the best podcaster, the best social media star, the best actor or actress, everybody has limits. Can they do great things? Absolutely. Can they do crazy things when it comes to how much they can perform and do and give back to other people? 1,000%. But they all have limits. So limits are not a limiting capacity. How's that? They are just something that measures the capacity, and everybody has different capacities along the way. And the purpose of boundaries, on the other hand, is to protect your well-being and to protect your relationships with the people in your life. Because let's be serious. If you don't set boundaries, you're going to end up with just, well, who knows, any of you who have been listening along for long enough or follow me on social media know this is my cue to remind you that kindness without boundaries leads to severe burnout and unrealistic expectations. Because you have to do that. You have to set boundaries with people. And it doesn't make you a bad person. Everybody has boundaries. You have to set them with your kids, with your coworkers, with your spouse, with your friends, your best friends, whoever it is. You have to set boundaries in your life to protect yourself and your well-being, and also protect the relationship you have with that other person or those other people. They're both important. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully maybe I'll try to create that little table and link it somewhere for you guys to see, so we can, if you need the visual, you can revert back to it. And so word-wise and without the visual aspect, think about it like this. Because we all right now are probably either listening on a cell phone to this podcast or we have one close by in our pocket, I want you to think about it like this. Limits are like your cell phone's battery. Boundaries are the power-saving settings that you can turn on to keep it from dying too fast. Does that make sense? So your phone battery has a limit. It can only last so long, but if you use it less and you set the boundary to say, hey, my phone battery's almost dead, but I'm going to need it in case I ever have to make a phone call because I have a long drive ahead of me and I can't charge it, you can turn on the power saving mode. You can shut it off and put it face down and let the battery save. You can put it in airplane mode. You can just put it in a different room and leave it alone so you're not scrolling through it every 15 seconds and you're saving the battery. So those are the steps. Those are your boundaries. Hey, listen, I'm not going to use my phone for the next 2 hours because I need the battery to last me on my long ride home or my long ride to the airport or whatever. But the battery still has a limit no matter what. But you put those boundaries in place to make sure it doesn't die too fast. Make sure you don't reach the limit of your phone's battery. So just the same way, we as people, you put boundaries in place to make sure that you don't reach your limit and have to throw in the towel and give up and say, I can't do this anymore, sooner than you want to. And, when it comes to limits and boundaries, I think the reason we get them confused is because we as people have been given some backwards social expectations, especially if you are, well, I'm a millennial, and I know, don't hold that against me. I know there's lots of jokes about millennials, but I don't think the generation matters. I think that socially, we have been given the social expectation that you have to push past your limits and to be available. And, we've been told and taught that limits are a weakness and that boundaries are, they make you selfish if you say no to things. And unfortunately, it takes a long time to unwrap that from our brains because we were classically conditioned and kind of built to think that way with lots of stuff. From a very young age, if you play sports, if you are in competitions, if you dance, if you sing, it doesn't matter what it is, but every kid out there or every grown-up and adult listening right now, some point in your life, I guarantee you had a parent or a coach or a friend say, come on, just push past. You gotta be stronger. Just keep going. You got to push past the tired. You got to push past the hurt. I grew up as a sports kid and in the fire department and working on a farm. Trust me when I tell you, I had lots of things and lots of sayings on my wall like pain is weakness leaving the body, we'll sleep when we're dead, all that kind of stuff, But we've been set up that way. So here's what we've created, and I think that's why we've created a burnout culture, is because we glorify doing too much. And I think maybe that's part of where I got so wrapped up in saying yes to everything. Not that I was looking for the glory. Please don't misunderstand me. I've never been the, hey, I want a parade and the bells and the whistles. I will happily do stuff behind the scenes, and I don't need the credit for it. That's not why I've ever helped people. But we glorify it in the aspect that it is something we can pat ourselves in the back for and say, hey, you did so much. You pushed past all those limits. Look at you. Yeah, you're exhausted and you can't get out of bed and you hate your life and you don't want to go to work and you called in sick even though you weren't sick because you just need a day to reset. But look at you. You go, you great little human you. And that's unfortunately what we've created. And the helpers in this world, the firefighters, the parents, the nurses, the teachers, the first responders, all those people, our identity gets tangled up with self-sacrifice. And I heard this beautiful thing once that a very good friend of mine said, they said they like to remind people that before you were a mom and before you were a busy mom, you were this person. You were a woman who loved to do things, who had likes and dislikes and favorite foods and favorite drinks and favorite restaurants and favorite places to go dancing and favorite books to read. And then just because you became a parent doesn't mean that all goes away. You are still that person. That person is still inside you, and you still owe it to that person to keep them mentally and physically and spiritually well, even though you've become a parent and you've gotten super busy. All right, so if you're sitting there saying, well, that's great, Todd, that's wonderful, we understand your setup, we get it, but now what do we do walking forward? Well, let's talk about what happens if you ignore them, if you ignore one of them or both of them. And I think the thing that happens varies a little bit person to person because, like I said, everybody's limits are different. But if you ignore your limits, you will end up exhausted, you will end up resentful, and you'll end up burned out. And remember, I've said in a previous episode too, resentment is crazy because if you say yes to something you don't want to do, the resentment is immediate. You start dreading it and hating it a week before it even gets there. And now, if you ignore a boundary, you end up with a poor relationship or chronic stress or guilt because you feel like you have to say no out of context to something. If there's a boundary in place that keeps you from saying yes all the time, that's awesome. You can say, hey, listen, I already have this boundary in place. I've told my friends and family about it. They know better than to ask for this one thing, X, Y, and Z. They know I'm not interested, not going to do it. But if you ignore the boundary, not only does your relationship go downhill, but also you end up with this guilt of having to say no because you're like, oh, well, I never told them no before. And now I have to tell them no now, and they're going to be mad at me, and I can't be a people pleaser if people are mad at me all the time. And it's one vicious cycle. So don't ignore your boundaries and don't ignore your limits. And if you ignore both of them, I think you end up feeling super disconnected from yourself because your body doesn't know what to do. If you ignore both of them, you end up with that physical or emotional exhaustion. And you say, pushed myself past my limit. I don't feel like myself physically or emotionally. And then also you ignore your boundaries and you give too much to other people. You are giving something you don't have to someone who asked for it when they didn't need to ask for it if you put the boundary in place. So if you ignore everything and if you ignore both of those things, unfortunately, I think that disconnect with yourself is going to be huge on lots of levels. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, physiologically, just everything about you is going to feel wrong. So okay, we got that hammered out. Now, if you sit there and say, okay, Hiller, now what? Now what is we figure out ways to honor both of those things, all right? So check your fuel tank. Check your energy. Say, listen, what do I honestly have energy for today? And I saw a video a long time ago. It was a husband and wife talking, or maybe it was a podcast, whatever it was. They said, never say, oh, well, if you're tired, honey, I'll do everything and I'll give you, 150%. If you don't have it, don't say that. And they had this really beautiful way of checking in with each other. And they said, hey, listen, I'm so worn out. I'm so depleted. I got like 50% of my energy. What do you got? And their spouse would say to them, well, I got 70. I can give you 70. I also had a long day at work, but I'm okay. I feel pretty good. I can give you 70. And they make a plan to work together to run their household and pick up the kids and get them to sports and all that kind of stuff by checking in with each other and being really honest about what they actually have energy for. And you can give yourself, you can say out loud the limits, or give them to yourself. If you say, listen, I've got 90 minutes this morning of super focused energy before I need a break or before I need coffee or before I need to go just for a walk to stretch my mental mind muscles, whatever it is. But you can say that out loud. You can give yourself a physical number if you need to. And also set a boundary while you're at it. say, hey, I'm not going to take any work calls during my lunch break, right? That's why we have a lunch break. Hey, I'm not going to answer my cell phone, my work phone, or my work emails after 5 p.m. at night, whatever it is. Give yourself a boundary. Or help talk to someone else about a boundary you're going to set with them, with your friendship or your relationship. Hey, listen, you know what? I know we've been talking about X, Y, and Z for the past 3 months, but I've kind of had enough of it. I can't talk about that right now. Let's take a break from talking about that, and we'll circle back if we need to sometime in the future. Like, that's okay to do. And I think sometimes we forget that those things are good and okay for us to do. And a lot of people have asked me, hey, I don't know how to be kind when I say no. I feel so guilty. I don't know how to say no without saying I'm sorry for it. But just listen, it's okay to communicate kindly, but still say no to things. Say, hey, you know, I'd love to help, but I don't have energy this week. I don't have capacity this week. I don't have bandwidth this week. There's a good technical term we can use this day and age. I don't have bandwidth this week to do that. You know, let's circle back and work on another time, okay? And remember to do this without feeling guilty. Resting is not lazy. It is essential maintenance for you as a human being. And whatever you do, make sure you're using self-compassion too. Your limits are going to change. Your boundaries are going to evolve. That's all part of being human. You don't have to get angry or upset with yourself if these things change somewhere along the line. All right, so as we wrap up today, let's remember, okay? Limits and boundaries are not the same, but we need both of them, okay? And so I want you to think today, what's one limit you need to respect today? What's one limit you need to remember, hey, be really mindful of this because you don't want to push yourself too far. And then I also want you to check in and ask yourself, what's one boundary you've been afraid to set, but you know you need? Because I'm sure there's one out there. I know there's dozens that I had to set for myself that I ignored for a long time. And I was like, I'm fine, but I was not fine. And for my folks who like to journal, use this as a journal prompt. Where in your life are you stretching past your limits? And maybe what boundary would help you come back into a place where you felt balanced and like you weren't pushing yourself back past your limits? While I was doing this episode and making some notes, I stumbled on a very beautiful quote that says, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And I absolutely love that. So as we close today, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a call to action. If you have something you'd like to share with me, send me a DM, send me a message, send me an email, Instagram, TikTok, come find me, and tell me one takeaway you have from this episode. I would love to know what things my listeners take away from my episodes, what things you hear me say and say, oh gosh, that's awesome, it resonated with me, because I do this for the people listening. I don't do it so I can sit in my office and talk to a microphone for a half an hour at a time. I do it because I really want to help the people out there and help my listeners because I love you guys, and you're the reason I do this. And as always, if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this, please share it with them. It only takes a second to copy and paste or click that share button, and you never know, it might do some good. My friends, my listeners, my wonderful, wonderful social media followers, if you're some of my listeners out there, I know you are. Thank you, as always, for listening, for being here with me and sharing this time. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Todd Talk. If you've liked what you've heard, please go ahead and subscribe and follow along so you don't miss any updates or new episodes. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day.